Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to start with a video to show you how to make a cookie slab table by yourself using like very little power tools. Now I understand that many people who watch the videos on my channel might think, well, this is not really do it yourself because you're using all those crazy power tools that normal people don't have at their disposal. And I think you're right. Some of the stuff I can use is really crazy, and it's just I lucked out with that workshop where I can use all those fantastic power tools that speed up the work and make it much easier. But many people don't have that luck, and so you might want to make a cookie slab table yourself, but you don't have those tools. And in fact, I got a couple of comments from people asking in different videos is like how do I go about doing this myself if I don't have all this gear available. And so I thought I might make a video showing you how to do that using very little power tools step by step. So this is going to be a longer video with more details about how to do certain things, how to go about that. I have to admit it's also a first time for me because I am actually usually doing everything with those crazy power tools. And so I might learn along the way a couple of things too that I will show you. Okay, so let's get started with this video. The first step when you want to make your own cookie slab table is to actually source your wood. You need to find a cookie slab that you like and that is suited for what you want to do. Okay? And so a cookie slab, I explained this in other videos, is a slab where you cut the tree like this. So this is a cookie slab. This was the tree. You can imagine it like that. And so you cut it like this. And it looks like a cookie because it's round. Now, that's just how it's normally referred to. But obviously you can have a very crazy tree with a lot of branches and things. And so it might not look as round as this one. That's fine too. There's really a lot of really interesting cookie slabs out there with interesting shapes. When you start looking for a cookie slab, you have a couple of possibilities. You can go to a lumber store and see what they have, or some people actually have a tree laying around somewhere, or like they somehow get to one. Like I had a couple of comments from people saying like, oh, there was a tree that fell down because of the storm, and now I have one of those cookie slabs and I want to transform it into a table. That's another option, but there's a couple of things to have in mind when you do this or when you buy it from a local lumber store. One thing to consider is what type of wood you pick, because if you work only like with hand tools or like low budget power tools, you might want to be careful with picking wood that is too hard. The harder the wood, the more difficult it is to work with hand tools or with cheap tools. And so you can pay attention to that. You can look into the wood database, which is an awesome website that has most of the woods from the world there, and it describes their properties. And so pick the wood that is on the medium size, not too soft. If it's too soft, it will dent when you put something on it. It will have dents and like marks, and you don't want that. Pay attention to this. Research the internet to figure out the properties of the wood that you're interested in and make sure it's appropriate. This slab here that I'm going to use is a lumber called Alder. Alder is a tree that grows fair amount here in Europe. And it's rather easy to work with. It's not too soft, not too hard, so it's right in between, and that's why I picked it. Second, you need to figure out what the humidity is of your slab. Now this is really important. I can't stress this enough. I have run many times into problems because I didn't do that or didn't know that I needed to do that in the beginning. If you cut a tree, freshly cut, the wood is humid. And it will take time to get dry. A long time if you just air dry it. If you start working with your cookie slab, you make it all beautiful and everything and you're finished and it was not dry, then the wood later on will warp. It will change its look, and like it will get all horrible, and all your work is for nothing. And so you don't want that. You need to ensure it's dry. A couple of things about that. Like, it's hard to say how fast it will dry the wood when you have it just in the air. There is a rule of thumb, which is very rule of thumb, which is about 1 centimeter per year from each side if on both sides air gets to it. So let's say you put that in your cellar that is not humid. So let's say it's a cellar that has some heating, or you put it somewhere in your house and you put a couple of pieces of wood below it so it can be aired from both sides, then it will dry at 1 centimeter per year from each side. So you can do the math. If you have a 10 centimeter thick piece of cookie slab, it will take 5 years to dry out. You will have to decide if you want to wait that long. If you want it to speed it up, you can get it kiln dried. And so that means you go to a store that has some kind of like an oven, you can imagine, and they put it inside there, and so it dries much faster. You'll have to pay something for that, and your wood will also crack more that way because it dries out faster. And so if you do a kiln drying, like, you will have more cracks in the slab. Like you see here, this crack here, that's because of the drying. This here was possibly air dried. I bought it. It was possibly air dried, and that's why it has only this large crack and a couple small ones. But more other than that, it's pretty intact. So if you get it kiln dried, that's the way to go. And then usually that's much faster. Like, depends again on your slab, but it might take a couple months, depending how fast they dry it, how hot it is in that oven. So when you go to a store and to buy a cookie slab, ask them if it's dry. If you cut it yourself, you will have to dry it yourself and then do the math. Or if you have the possibility, you can get a meter, like that's a little device that will measure how dry your slab is. Okay, and I have this here. This is one of those meters that you can use to measure how dry your slab is. And so usually it is ideal to have 12% of rest humidity or lower. You can go maybe 14 if you're crazy and you're impatient, but more than that is dangerous. Okay, so let's check out how dry this slab is. And this is the rest humidity. So you see here it measures 10.5%, and in different places you see it has different humidity. That is normal, so you need to move it along in a bunch of places and make sure it's fine. So this is more than fine. This is really dry. You can work with this slab, so that's all good. Now that you know that your slab is dry, you can start working with it. And so here comes the second step, which is removing the bark. You see that this slab here has bark on it. That's the outer crust, the skin of the wood, if you want to call it like that. Now, your slab might have a bark on it like this one here, and you might be tempted to keep the bark on your slab and have this as part of an aesthetic element of your cookie slab coffee table. Now, if you do this, you have to know that this can be risky because the bark dries out different. It has different properties than the wood itself. And so through time, when the wood always moves, right? You have more humidity, it absorbs humidity. You have less, it dries out. And so it moves. And through the time, like the months, the years, this might lead to your bark peeling off. It's very normal that the bark peels off. And if that happens, you'll have it all dirty in your bark, and you'll lose that element, right? And you will have cracks in it, and you won't be happy with it. So there's two ways to go about that. One is you can try to attach it to the wood through gluing or with epoxy resin, or you can remove it. I would, in general, especially if this is the first time you make a cookie slab table, I would recommend you remove it. That's a safer way to go, and not to try to attach it and keep it. I kept the bark a couple of times and it worked out fine, but it was always risky and sometimes it led to problems. So I am recommending you remove the bark. All right, and how do we remove the bark? To remove the bark, you can use a simple hand tool called a chisel. And I will leave links to all those different hand tools and power tools that we'll use in the description for different locations, so you can go and check it out. Maybe you have a chisel, so that's cool. Use the one you have. Maybe you know someone who has one, so you don't need to buy one if you don't want to go permanently into woodworking. You don't need that. And so that's just this knife, if you want to say it, and you will be able to just chop away the entire bark with a chisel and a hammer. And that's a dirty work, so we'll get a lot of bark flying around. So be prepared for some dirt. But without dirt and dust, woodworking isn't fun. So let's make some dust. All right, that was it. All the bark is gone. And if you think, oh, where's the footage? Where's the video showing how we remove the bark? I am so sorry. Apparently I pressed the wrong button and the video wasn't recorded. That's why I will show you how that looks using an old video where I removed the bark with a chisel. It's actually not really rocket science, it's just hammering it away. So let's give it a look. And that's it. That's how you remove the bark with a chisel. Very calmly go through the entire slab and remove all of that, and you create all that dust and that these leftovers here. You can throw them away. You can use them to make fire if you want, something like that, and your slab is ready for the next step. Okay, now that you removed all the bark, you can start with the next step, which is probably the most work intensive and the most fiddly one to do without large power tools. And so we're talking about getting this flat. I told you before that when you buy your slab, either it's dry, so it has already dried out, you need to have it dried out, but during that process, that slab that seems to be flat when you cut it from the fresh tree changes its shape, and it twists and warps because the wood loses the humidity and changes its consistency. And that's why a dried out slab is normally not flat, except if you bought it from someone who flattened it for you. So if you bought one that is not flat, which is typically the case when you buy a raw slab, then it will be all twisted. And you see that here with this slab. When I can move it like that, and you see that it moves from one side to the other. Let me show that to you in detail. So you see here, there is a gap, right? And I can move it, so you see that it's not flat. You see the same here, on this end, the same story, it is not flat. And you see, when you look at it from this angle, you can clearly see that it's like on this side, that side is more up and this one is more down. So it's not flat. So you need to invest a lot of time to try to get this flat with manual tools, because you don't want to have a coffee table that your cup just slips down your table onto the floor. It needs to be flat. To start doing this, the first thing you need to do is you need to have a flat board. Like this one here, you see this is a board. I put it on my work table. So this is a flat board where I put the slab on it. And now you need to use wedges to stabilize it. And what I will do is I will use these are actually mixing sticks. And I will use these to put them on the gaps to stabilize the slab on the location it is. Let me do that and show it to you in detail. So you see the slab moves like that. I will take some of these wedges and put them in the different places. I just move them in until I feel there is a resistance, like that. You can still move it Stable here. Stable here, but not here. You see where it moves. So we need some additional wedges here. Okay, so now no matter where I press, this stays stable. But now it can still move. It can still move to either direction. So I need to stabilize the slab on the same location, because when I start working on it, I want it to stay in the same place. And I will try to do this using these little pieces of wood, scrap wood. I will attach them to the board on different places to ensure that this is not moving around. Okay, let me do that with a couple of wood screws to make sure this doesn't move. What you see now is that the slab is pretty stable, but it twists, it turns here, and so I don't want that, right? I need it to stay in the same location. So what I will do is, there is a crack here, and you can be inventive here, right? You just need to stabilize it, doesn't matter how. So what I will do is I will put 2 screws in here to keep it from rotating. Let me see if that worked. Yes, now it barely moves. It should be good enough. I'll give it a try. Here, like if you start working and you realize it's moving around, you can still stabilize it. It's not the end of the world. You're not using a super large power tool that will create a lot of damage. You will just have to make sure to stabilize it better if you realize once you start working that it starts to move. All right, now what you need to do is you need to measure the lowest point, the lowest height of your slab that is stabilized. In my case, this is about like in this location here, and if I'm not completely mistaken, it is 9 centimeters. That means that I will have to try to make this flat at a height of about 9 centimeters in this location where the slab is stabilized. So what I will do is I will take a pencil and I will just mark the 9 centimeter heights in different points, and then just unify it with a line which will serve to me as a guiding line to know more or less on how much material I need to remove. Let's do that. Alright, so I marked this line of 9 centimeter across the entire slab, and unfortunately I have to tell you that there is a lot of material that we will have to remove for this slab. It is really twisted. Let me show that to you. So here you see where I marked the line, and you see that these are multiple centimeters of material that need to be removed to get it to the line of 9. Right, so that is a lot of wood to remove it with, let's say, a hand tool or a cheap power tool. Okay, for this entire project, there's like two tools that you need to have, 2 important tools, like major tools that you need to have. One is to remove wood to make it flat. I mean, you could theoretically try to do that with a sander, but that will take you forever to remove that much material, so you can't do that, right? So you need a planer, and so there's hand planers, both electric and manual. This here is the electric version of this here. This tool here is called a hand planer, not non-electric, and what it has here a blade, and with that blade you can move that across the wood and remove material at the height of this. So it doesn't take away a lot of material, and that way you can chip away wood. The electric one does the same. You can set the height between, in this case, between 0 and 2 millimeters that it removes, and it does the same in an electric way. And so it removes material. That is much faster. Price-wise, I have to say that it's actually not really a lot of difference. There are really cheap versions of hand planers, like for maybe $10. These are no good. Like, don't even go there. You will, like, first of all, you will have forever, and it will take forever, but it will also break. It's just, these are no good. The minimum you need to invest for a hand planer that is more or less decent, like this one here, is $35. The minimum you need to invest for a low quality, cheap electric hand planer, like this one, is about $50. So these $15 of difference, my opinion, it's not worth saving them. I would go for an electric one because it's faster to use and it's almost as cheap as the manual one. So the manual one, if you want to go for one of those, or maybe you have one of those and you don't need to buy one, right? You use it like that. You start chipping away all this material. As you see, we know, like here, that's the place where there's a lot of material, right? Here is 9 centimeters, so here's where I need to remove, and I do it like that. You know me. I use power tools. Man, that is so boring, right? That will take me hours and hours to remove it like that, and it will be super dusty also because there's obviously no dust collection attached to this manual tool. So I will not do this with this tool. Like, there's no way this video is worth that many hours. But I wanted to show it to you in case you are a patient person and you have one of those at home already and you want to do that. It is possible. It will take you a lot of time. If you don't have one of these and you need to buy something, buy an electric one like this one. I will put links in the description for a really cheap one that is more or less decent, and you can work with that. And so I will work with this one here. I will try to remove all of this material. I will attach it to my dust collector, so it will be messy, but not as messy as with this one, and it will be faster as with this one. It will still take me a lot of time to do that. All right, that went pretty well. You get a little bit tired when you have to remove a lot of material with a hand planer, so take some breaks in between. But overall, it went pretty well. If you look at the slab, it looks decently flat. I took a spirit level to measure if it's flat in different locations. So you go ahead and do that all the time in different places, and then you try to correct to make sure it's as even as possible. Now, important to know here is that you won't get it perfect. Like, don't go crazy about it. This is, we're taking here a very handy approach, like with hand tools. It's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's handmade, so at the end you might see that there is some imperfections in it, and that's kind of like also the charm of a project like that. So once you have the feeling that this is flat and your spirit level shows it that it's more or less okay, you're done with this side. Now, this side is more or less flat, the other one is not. Remember, we put in the wedges here so it doesn't move and everything. The other side is not flat. We need to flatten that too. And how do we do that? This time it's easier. We just turn this around, and because this side is now flat, we don't need the wedges anymore. We still need to secure it because we need to, again, with the hand planer, make sure to even it out and to make sure it's flat on the other side. So let's do that. Okay, so now we turned it over. It's on the other side. You see that the other side is not as bad as the one we just planed. And what you see is that there is a little bit of a movement here. And that is because obviously we planed it by hand, so there is actually, it's not perfect, right? And so I will control that again using a little wedge. And like that, it's stable again. And now I'm going to stabilize it to make sure it doesn't move around. As a next step, what I'm going to do is again to measure and to put a little mark with a pencil to make sure I mark the appropriate height so I know how much to cut. Okay, so now I stabilize the slab, I mark the height of 8 centimeters, and I will repeat the same with a hand planer, more or less, to plane it down to that height, make sure it's even. Let's get it started. Okay, that was it. I think that is good enough. Again, this is not going to be perfect. If you want a perfect table, perfectly flat, go to IKEA. If you want to do your own stuff, then it won't be perfect, and that's the chart. I am going to clean up here a little bit because I hate working in a mess, and then we can continue with the next step. Okay, here we are back again, and the next step will be to close all your cracks and holes with epoxy resin. But before we do that, we will give this slab a pass with a sander. We do this to remove all the marks from the hand planing and this really rough surface that you have because of the planing. And for this, you will need the second power tool that I recommend to use if you want to do one of those cookie slab tables. So there's the hand planer and the sander. These are the two power tools that I think will make your life a lot easier. And that is the orbital sander. This orbital sander here is a little bit of a fancy one. This one is expensive, but again, there are really cheap orbital sanders that you can buy for around 50 bucks, and those will do a fine job. You can also, obviously, maybe you have one, or you can also borrow one from friends, and then you don't have to buy it. But having some kind of a sander, it doesn't have to be an orbital sander. You can also have other type of sanders to do the same job. I really do like the orbital sander. I think it just leaves a smoother surface. And so in general, you can use it for different applications. We'll also use it for the live edges. And so I just think it's worth the investment. What I will take is a 40 grit paper. This is really rough. And with that, I will remove all the marks and just make sure it is a more or less even and smooth surface before we then apply the tape to close the cracks with epoxy resin. The reason why I sand it before applying the epoxy is that you will have to tape everything here. And if this is rough, then the tape doesn't stick that well, and the epoxy resin will go through those little cracks, and you will lose epoxy resin, and it's expensive and it's a mess. You don't want that. So that's why a pass with a 40 grit paper to make sure all these things are removed is just a good idea. Let's do that. Okay, that's it. We've sanded both sides of the slab, and now we can start preparing everything to pour the epoxy resin. Now, before we go to the next step, I want to mention one thing. For this slab, it was fine doing it that way. First planing, then sanding, and now applying the epoxy resin. Because this slab is really stable, It's all in one. It has only one large crack and a couple of minor things, but it's nothing major. And that is why it was able to sustain the pressure of the planer without falling apart. If you buy a more crazy cookie slab, one that is more unstable, that has a lot of cracks, maybe weird shapes, maybe pieces are almost falling apart, right? Then you cannot just plane with a hand planer, because this will be a lot of pressure on that slab and it might just fall apart. In these cases, you need to start first stabilizing everything with the epoxy resin. So basically what we're going to do now will be the first step, and after everything is stabilized, the epoxy resin is cured, you can then start planing. Okay, so you have to switch the order of the work steps in case you have a cookie slab that is more unstable. Before I start with the tape here to close this crack, I will clean up this crack a little bit, because I'm going to apply transparent epoxy resin so people will be able to see through that crack. And there's a couple of leftover like splinters in here that we need to clean up, so we're going to do this first, and then we're going to close everything with a tape. When the wood dries, you will get a bunch of those cracks in the cookie slab. That is because the wood is getting smaller and it has to tear apart in a couple of places, so you get those drying cracks here. This is a really large one, and when that happens, you see that you will get those kind of splinters here that are not very nice looking. That's just a normal part of the drying process, and using a chisel you can remove those and clean it up a little. You don't have to go crazy here, because people won't see like all the details in here. It's a pretty deep crack, but you want to make sure you don't have these kind of things that might look ugly. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so here we are. We are going to start closing all the cracks with a water resistant tape. One thing you have to know when you apply epoxy resin is that epoxy resin always finds a place to leak. And leaky epoxy resin is expensive, because epoxy resin is expensive, but it also messes up your workspace. You don't want that. So the better you can make sure to seal off everything so nothing leaks, the less work you will have afterwards. So I recommend buying a really strong water resistant tape that then seals off everything, that doesn't let anything through, and with that you can do a lot. When you have a crack like that, then you will have to close everything here and up here, because you will have to fill up here everything with epoxy resin. And so let's start here. So if the crack ends here, make sure to put the tape a lot behind that crack, because as I mentioned to you, epoxy resin finds every single crack. We'll make sure to try to take the entire crack here. And now make sure to press it really hard to make sure it sticks well. Close all the little holes and cracks and everything, and continue. Once you did a layer like that, I recommend taking a 90-degree angle and taping everything like that to close all these gaps in here between. So now, after you have worked with a 90-degree angle, you might think you're done. No, add another one like that, so a third layer, to ensure everything is sealed off well. That's it. I think we sealed off this crack. We're done sealing off the crack. we're going to start filling this crack with epoxy resin now. And as you see, I put a little piece of plastic below the cookie slab because I'm still not 100% sure nothing will leak, because epoxy resin leaks. And so that's why I have this here. It's an additional safety measure so it doesn't all spill on my table. Alright, let's start with the epoxy resin. If you've ever worked with epoxy resin, you can skip to the next section because you know all of that already. Epoxy resin is, you might have seen a lot of videos where people do stuff with epoxy resin. It's two liquids that you mix together, and these components together create a chemical reaction which generates heat, and then after a certain amount of time it gets all hard, and afterwards you can sand it, you can put colors in it, so you can do a lot of fancy stuff. One of the disadvantages of epoxy resin is that, well, there's a bunch of disadvantages. One is you need to be pretty precise with how you mix it. If you go over by a lot, then it will never cure. If you've ever had epoxy resin that doesn't cure, that is a nightmare. So you need to be precise. You need to be really, you need to mix it a lot to make sure it's well mixed and those components touch each other well, and that chemical reaction starts happening. And then the third and the most important thing is it's actually pretty toxic. Whenever you work with epoxy resin, I recommend using gloves. You don't want any of that stuff to touch your skin. You should also wear a mask, which now currently in COVID times should be laying around hopefully. But like the better the mask, the more secure. So make sure you protect, even while you are mixing it, your respiratory system. Once you have it mixed, you need to apply it like pretty fast because it will start heating up and curing. So you don't have like endless time to apply it because then it will start getting hard. The same regarding being toxic is actually the case when you sand it. Even more, you don't want any of that dust in your lungs, so you need to protect yourself there too. So I'm going to mix this. When you buy epoxy resin, you need to look at your epoxy resin to see in what ratio you have to mix it. Most epoxy resins I know of are mixed like the component A is like 2 units and then 1 unit of the hardener. But different epoxy resins have different ratios, so you have to look at your epoxy resin. You also need to look at your epoxy resin to see how thick you can pour it. The thicker you can pour it, the more expensive it is. And so the cheaper epoxy resins, you cannot pour a lot of it because then it will overheat and it will break. And that happened to me too in the past, so you don't want any of that to happen. So you need to check your epoxy resin, how thick you can pour it, and then apply it like that. I always use the cheapest epoxy resin I can find, this one here. I can only pour it 1 centimeter at a time. That's why I need to pour layer by layer by layer. I don't mind, I never rushed. And also like epoxy resin is really expensive. And so if you buy the really fancy one, it will cost you easily double or triple what this one here costs. And that makes the entire project cost more. Another thing to have in mind, like when you mix it, I use something to weight it. So I don't go, like if you have a mixing cup like this, you will have like marks. You can go by those, but they're not as precise. And remember, I told you, you should be as precise as possible because else the chemical reaction doesn't happen. So I use actually a device to tell me how heavy, how much I poured into the cup, and then I take the appropriate ratio to mix it. So I'll go ahead, this is boring, I won't tell you a lot of details. I will go ahead, know that I will only mix a little because we have this large crack, and instead of pouring like a lot in it and then me suddenly seeing that it's leaking, I will pour a little bit in it and then let it cure and to make sure there is no leak. Okay, we have here a little bit of epoxy resin. These are 45 grams I mixed, so it's not a lot. And you see here are a crack. And so I will put everything in here and then just wait to see if there is any leak. And if there is no leak, everything hardens well, we can pour the next time, we can pour more. Now we just have to wait and see. My epoxy resin takes 1 day, 24 hours to cure. So I'll let this overnight and then check it out tomorrow. All right, here we are back, and after many layers of epoxy resin, we're done. You see that this large crack has been filled with epoxy resin until we reach the top, and you've seen in the last seconds of the video before that I also flooded the entire surface with epoxy resin. So this is all hard epoxy resin here. The reason why I'm doing this, I have a separate video explaining why I'm flooding the cookie slabs, so I'm not going to go into details here. You can just click through to that video and look at it there. And now we are done with the epoxy resin, and what we need to do is we need to remove all of that again, right? Because we want a smooth surface where we can feel the wood. So we need to sand away all the epoxy resin that is on the surface. We need to make sure that there is no bump here, that where the crack is, that it's all one surface. And we will do this with the sander and a 40 grit sanding paper. Make sure again to wear your mask because you're going to produce dust with epoxy resin, and that's not healthy. Also make sure to have multiple of those sanding discs, because you're going to see that the sanding disc, after using it a while, it will be all clogged, all white and no good, and so we'll have to go through multiple of those until we have it all sanded. Let's get started. By the way, as you can see here, we did have a leak, so the epoxy resin went through all this tape and leaked here onto our plastic that protects our work table. So you see why it is a good idea to take a lot of that tape and also additional protective gear, so you make sure you don't have epoxy resin on a place that you don't want to. I sanded everything with 40 grit paper, and then I moved to 80 grit paper, which is this one, to make it a little bit smoother. So 40 and 80, I removed all the excess epoxy, and you can see here now a smooth surface. Now before I continue with this surface to make it even smoother with high grit paper, we're going to move the bottom side first and then do the live edges, the sides, before we finish this. Because I don't want to finish this first and do it all smooth, then I turn it around, do all the other things, and then the surface gets damaged and I need to sand it again. So that's why I stop with 80 grit and then we turn it around. So let's do that. We turn it around and we have here the tape, so I'm going to try to remove the tape, which is usually really a fiddly thing that requires some patience. So you see that the epoxy resin, there was not a lot of leaks here on the crack. Where it leaked mostly was here on the live edge side, and that's very often the case because on the live edge it's much harder for you to tape everything. There's always a crack here and there that remains, and so it all leaked out along the live edge. That's not a big deal, we can fix that. What I'm going to do now first is to sand the bottom side with 40 grit paper to remove all the excess epoxy, make it a little bit smoother, but I'm not going to go crazy here. Remember, this is the bottom side, you don't see that, so you don't have to spend a lot of time here, you don't have to go to 80, 120 and so on. You can do that if you want, if you're passionate about the bottom side. Typically I do go until 120 on the bottom side, just because I think it's, if you see the bottom side of a table and it looks ugly, then you're also always questioning what was the quality of the overall work. But you don't have the power tools I have in my workshop, and so for me going up to 120 for the bottom side is much quicker than for you. So I think 40 grit is fine. I'm going to remove all of that and then we can continue with the live edges. Let's do that. Okay, we sanded the bottom side too. That's fine, we don't need more than that. Let's move to the live edges. Now before we move to the live edges, I want to tell you a couple of things about that. How your live edge looks depends heavily on your slab and on the type of tree. Because this is the outer part of the tree, and so depending on how the tree looks, this will be really very different. Different woods will have different shapes, but also they will look really different depending on how you work with it, how much epoxy resin leaked on the sides, and so on. So here we have a couple of problems with the live edges with this one. First of all, we have a large part where we have some epoxy resin leaks, but then there's also other parts where pieces of wood have been torn out, possibly by the hand planer when it was hand planing it. So it chipped out and like it all looks ugly. So let me show these spots to you. Okay, so you see here, that's where the epoxy resin leaked. We need to remove all of the epoxy resin. We need to remove that tape. That tape is below epoxy resin, so that we need to all sand away. But then there's also other places, like for instance here, you see there's a lot of pieces torn out. Here it's pretty okay. And here we have another place where we have a lot of torn out pieces. So we need to get rid of all of that and make it nice. Normally, I would recommend you to leave the live edge as natural as possible. That's the nicest look you can get for a cookie slab. What I often do is I have a plastic brush, and so I brush all the live edges. So that is to remove all the dirt, but other than that, it leaves the entire, like the nice looking shapes, the structure, everything intact. And so that's the best case scenario. I want to show you a method where you can actually do your own cookie slab table with the least possible amount of power tools. And so that's why I won't recommend you to buy like an electric brush and a plastic brush to brush all the live edges. That will just move up the project costs. So let's not do that. The other thing is that when you have a case like this one, brushing alone is not enough. We have all the epoxy resin that needs to go away, and also the torn out pieces with a brush will still look torn out, so it's still going to look ugly. So in this case, in this particular slab, we need to sand these away. And so if we sand one place, if we sand multiple places, it's likely going to be the best that we sand the entire live edge everywhere. We make sure it looks more or less even. That's obviously unfortunate. I don't like doing this, but in this case, I think it's the only solution we have, and it's going to be fine. The other thing is that normally, I would say if you sand the live edges, to use a tool like that. So that's a Delta sander. Or there's also another tool where I have a video review from. It's the Mini Carver, which I love, which has small sanding discs, and you can sand that really nicely. Because sanding with an orbital sander like we have here is going to be much more tedious. But I'm not going to recommend you to buy one of those other sanders, because that's again going to move up the project cost. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the orbital sander, which is one of the two power tools that I recommend you to buy or to rent to sand all the live edges. So it's not the ideal tool, but it's the one that we have if we want to do a low budget project like this one here. And so that's what we're going to do with that. Okay, I finished sanding the entire life edge with 40 grit paper. And as you can see, this was a lot of work and a lot of sanding discs that went into getting this right. So one thing you see here is that in a couple of places I left a little bit of the outer bark on the life edge. That is on purpose because I do think it looks nicer when you have different colors, right? You can also get it completely white, sanding it all off. That's a matter of taste. There's a couple of places where you have these chipped out pieces that I didn't sand completely. I could have just removed more wood here to make sure you don't see those, but I don't mind. I think it kind of gives the life edge a little bit of character. Other than that, you see that we have in different places always these stains with just the outer piece of the bark. That shouldn't peel off. That's very attached to the wood, so you shouldn't have issues with that. And so that's how the life edge looks. Okay, before we move into finishing the upper side of your cookie slab table, I want to spend a couple of words about the legs. You will have to decide what kind of legs you want for your table. And one thing to know is that because we did this very manual planing with a hand planer, that typically you will not get it perfect. It is pretty flat, but not perfect flat. If you use 4 legs, there is a high chance that it won't be even, that it will wobble. And the way to prevent that is to not use 4 legs. Use 3 legs. Because when you use 3 legs, like here, like these, it won't wobble. It can't, right? It will stand well, no matter if there is little differences in the surface of your cookie slab table. And so no matter if you use wooden legs or steel legs like here, just try to use 3 legs, and that way you get rid of that problem. I like to use steel legs, as you might know from my videos, but you can use whatever legs you want. Buy them online. There's a lot on Etsy, which I like a lot, buying the legs from different places in the world. I'm not going to spend more time talking about the legs. I'm also not going to show you how to attach them because it's very easy, just a couple of wood screws and that's it, so it's not a big deal. We're going to focus on the rest of the tabletop. Alright, we are almost done with our cookie slab table. What we now need to do is to make the surface, the upper side of your table, so the one you're going to use and see, really smooth. And for this, we're going to take again the orbital sander and then use 120 grit paper, sand it, then move to 180, sand it, and then move to a 240. And what you are going to see is that I use the motion I use is I draw an 8. Okay, always drawing an 8 here, and that is if you always just use straight lines, there is a risk that you will get sanding lines. I don't know how you call it in English, but it's kind of smooth lines that you will see after you coat it, and you don't want that. So always move it as if you're drawing an 8 with your sander up until you reach 240 grit, and that should be fine. Alright, the cookie slab top has been completely sanded up to 250 grit. What I also did off camera is that I sanded the life edges with 80 grit and 120 grit to make them smoother. I didn't go up to 240, but you can totally do that if you care about that and you want really smooth edges. For me, up to 120, that's good enough. I will do one last step, which is the edges here. They're sometimes a little bit sharp because of the sanding. And so I'm going to sand with 240 grit paper, very smooth, very quickly, sand those edges to make sure nobody cuts themselves. It's not too sharp. Okay, so this beauty is almost done. We have it all smooth, the top, the sides, it's pretty much done. Now, the next step is that you need to clean the workpiece, remove all the dust, okay? And once you did that, it's ready to be coated. To remove the dust, I recommend you to take mineral spirits and a clean cotton rag. Okay, here I have mineral spirits, a cotton rag. I will make sure the cotton rag is wet with mineral spirit and then remove all the dust from the top and from the live edges. Alright, you see that by cleaning we removed all the dust and it's a little bit wet now, and that's why you can already start to see the beauty of the slab, the wood, how it exposes its colors. But this, once it dries, will become all pale again, as you've seen before. So this is not finished yet, but you can start to feel that this slab is going to look pretty cool. You look at that, this is the cotton rag. You see it's all dirty. This is all the dust we removed with the mineral spirit. Now let's talk about coating. There's many coats out there for wood. And so if you have a preferred one, just go ahead and use whatever you like. There are two coats that I would recommend for a slab like this. One is the most basic and simple and natural one, which is linseed oil. If you want to go with oil, just know that it will not protect your slab a lot from liquids. And I have a video where I test different kind of coatings and liquids. So you can click through that if you're interested. It will not protect it a lot against liquids. So if this is a table that you will not use a lot or use with a lot of care, or maybe just to put a vase on it or something like that, then by all means go with linseed oil. It will make it look beautiful. You can easily apply more if it dries out, and then that's it. If you're planning to use it more and you want to protect it a little bit against liquids, then I would go for Rubio Monocoat. The advantage of Rubio Monocoat is that it protects it better from liquids, but also Rubio Monocoat reacts with epoxy resin. That means it will also give color to your epoxy resin, while oil can't do that, right? The resin cannot soak up the oil, and therefore it will stay all oily. While if you use Rubio Monocoat, that reacts with the upper layer of the molecules, the upper coat. That's why it's called monocoat. And it can do that with epoxy resin too. And so that's interesting because in this slab here, we used epoxy resin on this large crack, but also we flooded the entire surface of the slab with epoxy resin. So there's many places where you will have epoxy resin. And so using Rubio Monocoat will make sure it all looks nice and is protected. And so that's why I'm going to use Rubio Monocoat on this slab. If you want to go ahead and use linseed oil, the application is super easy. You just pour some oil on it, you rub it in, then you let it dry out. Next day, you do another layer, maybe one more, and that's it. So super easy. Do it on both sides, and that's it. If you use Rubio Monocoat, the application is a little bit more difficult, and so I'm going to show you this in a second, but it's also pretty easy. This here is Rubio Monocoat Pure. Pure means that it has no color pigments in it. It will bring out the natural beauty of your wood. I mostly use Pure, but if you want to give it some kind of other look, black or white or whatever, you can look into other colors. Rubio Monocoat is pretty expensive. So if you're not planning to do a lot of those or other projects where you use Rubio Monocoat, I would recommend you to buy the smallest bottle, which is this one. So it's the cheapest one. It will be enough for the slab and you're not wasting money. Also, Rubio Monocoat after a while kind of gets dried out, so once you open it, so you can't keep it forever, and that's why buying like a big can of Rubio, if you're not going to use it, makes no sense. So buy a small one. Here I will use this one because it's open already. And I'm going to explain to you the process step by step. Here's the things you need. You need the Rubio, you need a brush, a cheap brush, and then you need at least 2 clean cotton rags, maybe a couple more. And the process is as follows. You open the bottle of Rubio and you, with a brush, you apply the Rubio on the entire surface of your slab. Then on the sides, on the live edge, all around. You make sure everything is soaked up. You make sure you don't see any spot that is still light. Everything should be soaked up with the Rubio monocoat with that liquid. Once you did that, you wait for about 10 minutes, okay? Don't apply too much of it. Don't like make it all drippy. It's a waste of Rubio, and also it will be more work afterwards. Just make sure everything has at least 1 coat, a monocoat, okay? You let it cure for about 10 minutes. And after those 10 minutes, you take a cotton rag, a clean one, and you start to remove all the Rubio. It needs to soak up all the excess Rubio. You don't want any of that left. You use both ends, both sides of the rag. Make sure all the clean sides get dirty and you remove all the Rubio. Then you put away that rag, take the second one and do the same again. The goal is that your rag should stay as clean as possible. That means there's no more excess Rubio to be soaked up. Once that is done, you wait for about a week. Rubio monocoat comes also with an accelerator that you can buy, which then you need to mix the Rubio with the accelerator and then you apply that liquid. That way it will cure much faster within 24 hours. I never do that. I never use the accelerator. It costs money. I'm usually not in a rush. And also, I have found it to be stressful to do that because when you mix it with the accelerator, you only have a certain amount of time to apply it. If you mix too much, you have to throw it away. If you don't mix enough, you have to mix new one, which is a pain. And so I'm just very relaxed with a normal Rubio, no accelerator, no rush. Apply it, let it cure for a week. You're going to use this maybe for years, maybe your entire life. So what is a week? That's what we're going to do step by step. Okay, as you could see, I applied a couple of coats of Rubio monocoat, so not mono, but more. And that is because this is an end grain slab. So it's thirsty, as I told you. We applied epoxy resin and that helps it a lot, but it's still end grain, still thirsty. Everywhere where the wood is exposed, it will drink more. And so that is why when you apply it, after applying first coat and you look at it, you will see that there's dry spots, and wherever you have dry spots, you should put another coat on it. So I just passed with a brush another one, a second, maybe a third time to make sure everything is well lubricated. And now we're going to wait about 10 minutes and then we're going to remove everything. Okay, we have waited long enough. I'm going to remove the excess Rubio with the cotton rags. And as I told you before, do a first pass with one rag until everything is clean, then take a second one, and that's it. That's it. My friends, we're done. This is our cookie slab coffee table. That is your top. You can put the legs below, 3 legs, and that's it. You can use it, you can sell it, you can give it away, whatever pleases you. And so I'm going to let this cure. Afterwards, I'm going to take a couple of pictures so you see it on the end, some of the details. And I hope this video was helpful for you. And so this slab is not perfect. It is handmade with very few power tools, and so I'm going to give it away. So do you want this? You can have it. I will do the following. The first person who writes a comment that you want this, I'll give it to you for free. You just have to pay the shipping. So depending where you live on the world, this can be expensive because it's not very lightweight, this thing. But the slab I'm going to give to you, and you can look for some legs, put them on there, the legs you like, and you have a little coffee table. That's it. I hope you found this video helpful. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and details that I missed to explain. Use the comment section, put your comments in there, all your questions. I will answer to all of the questions. I always answer to all of the comments in my channel, so please make use of that, and I'm going to try to help you as good as I can. Okay, that was it. That was the video showing you step by step how to create your own coffee table, your own cookie slab coffee table with very few power tools. If you do this, don't forget the most important thing is to have tons and tons and tons of fun. Fun creating your own stuff. This is the beauty of it. Creating your own things is just magic. And so I hope this video helps you to do that. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel so you can see my next videos, and I hope to see you around very soon.